right, ladies and gents, we're gonna get started. Up front, I commend you for being here. All of you have made a great decision today. You're gonna spend 1 hour thinking deeply about your future profession. Only 1 hour every week, and this is the only hour we have to bring you genuine experts in fields that matter to what you're gonna do in the future, to inject pure knowledge and information directly into your brain, and the chance for you to ask them questions and for them to help you understand things. So great job. Today, you know these two, but it's worth pointing out, we have two exceptionally experienced air defense NCOs who have worked at every echelon of air defense, from the absolute highest level of strategic down to the lowest tactical level for that branch in the Army at all echelons that I am even aware of. They know more about airspace management and employment of these key protection systems than I do times 10. So everything they're about to tell you is pure gold. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Usual format will follow. They're going to present some information up front, and then we'll get into it. Pending any questions, I'll turn it over to Sergeant Smith, Sergeant Courtney. Gentlemen.
Me? Okay. All right. So essentially, we're going to graze over most of the topics, kind of give you just beyond that surface level information, and then kind of open up for question, because there's so many different things to cover. We couldn't possibly cover all of it in detail. So we're just kind of trying to get to the details that you're interested in, if that makes sense. Y'all probably seen this slide before. It's actually like the branch brief to ROTC, right? Pull this from. But it's a good representation of kind of what we have at each level, from CRAM down in the mud up to space, aka Sergeant Courtney. Then what the threats are at each of those levels. MSHORAD is something that's coming in to replace Avenger. We're also looking at, I don't know if anybody heard, a few years ago, we agreed to purchase Iron Dome from Israel. We're kind of now stepping back from that a little bit, looking at some of our own systems to employ. But we are looking for something in that realm, essentially beyond the capabilities of CRAM, to defend against large volleys of rockets and small munitions like that. And something that's mobile, because this is not mobile. It takes 24 hours to replace just one gun. Whenever we emplaced the site, it was 6 days before we had the entire system up and running to initial operation capability. And then further along to get up to full operational capability. So it's not a quick thing to do. Sergeant Courtney, what do you got?
So, following along with what Sergeant Smith is saying, everything that you see on here when it comes to the actual systems up until you get to your GMD realm, everything is mobile. What I mean by mobile, for example, for like Patriot and your THAAD and some of the other sensors, what mobile means is that it's transported through means of C-17s and other means of those, right? The issue that we run into with some of these here is I wanted to go too far in depth, is that how these are placed is going to be based off of what's called the Cal and Dow. Okay, we're going to go back here just a little bit. And these things are built through the plans. They have certain sectors that they are actually scanning through their respective theater. Okay, and so like he said, they're a little bit harder to just be able to just pick up and move. All right. Whereas as you get down here, some of these two right here is where you're going to be seeing a lot of your mobile stuff here that can go move on the fly. Okay.
Yeah, really the only one of these that's going to be in direct support of you if you're not air defense is going to be Avenger / MSHORAD. Those are really the only, and they're essentially, MSHORAD is replacing Avenger. So we'll call it the only system that's specifically designed to support the maneuver force and move with them, provide that protection capability directly to that small unit. Everything else is designed to defend assets that are approved and decided on at a very high level. So we'll go slide, I think it should be, we'll go one more. All right, so to give you all an understanding, this is an example of one of our, we'll call it a division level organization. So air defense is not structured like the rest of the Army. If you think most other branches, you go to an installation, you belong to that division, you fit into the brigade battalion structure somehow, And if not, you could be like an MI battalion, but you're still reporting to that division. Air defense does not report to divisions. We do not report to any other branch in the Army. So we have our own sort of division level element, which is this Army Air and Missile Defense Command. There's 4 of them. There's 3 active duty and 1 National Guard, and they're regionally aligned. So like 32nd here that we're kind of showing the command structure of. They are responsible for all Army Air Defense in the CENTCOM AOR area of responsibility. And then there's one for Indo-PACOM, there's one for Europe, and there's one for the continental US. The one in the continental US is the National Guard element. And you'll notice they're at different places, right? So we have them from Bliss, Sill, Hood, Bragg. And if they're at those installations, once again, they don't belong to that installation. They're what's called a tenant unit. So like I was at 244 at which is actually at Fort Campbell. Our brigade was at Bragg, our division was at Bliss, and we didn't really have to do anything to 101st set other than things that directly related to the installation. So this kind of gives you an idea of if these things do get pushed out to areas where units are, they're there to support them, and the level of control that that supported organization has is agreed upon ahead of time. But it's not like they have full control over any of these ADA assets, to include Avenger and M-SHORAD.
So for those that were here for the Army Fires session, when we talked about how some of the missile units would be forward in division and brigade AOs, but not be under their control, it's a similar concept. There's a supporting relationship that's generally general support reinforcing, so that you might be sustaining them. If you're a BSB, a brigade support battalion, or the division service support battalion, you might be sustaining air defense and long range fires units, but they don't work for you. And that's because the logistics to execute that exist at your echelon, but the ability and the authority to employ those fires, defensive fires, exist at echelons above. So that's why we have a unified chain of command, and then we have tasking to allow that to happen. So just because you can't task them to do things doesn't mean they're not helping you. They may be stopping big missiles from impacting in your formation, or they may be employing fires at long ranges to allow you to be able to close with and destroy the enemy.
Just to give you a little bit further confusion, not necessarily confusion, but to take it one step further than here. So where majority of my career has been at, it's been more at the strategic level and more at the theater regional. So as you can see this patch here, right, it's going to be 11th Brigade, right? So when I was deployed, I was attached to 343. So administratively attached. So they're the ones that took care of us while we were there, whereas our first sergeant commander were actually with us, but they 343 is the ones that supplied us. Another example would be as I go to Korea, I'm going to be with the 35th ADA, which we're ACON to 8th Army. 8th Army in the surrounding area there, they support us and give us all the equipment, those things that we need there. So that just gives you a little bit more complexity of how ADA works in air defense.
Yeah, so essentially like at Fort Campbell, right? I had my battalion. For administrative reasons, we belong to 101st Barty. But we also did administrative things through 108th Brigade at Bragg. 101st Division wanted us to do things, and then we were listening to 32nd AAMDC. So we had like 4 dads, or 2 dads and 2 moms. What is IFPC? Yeah, so that's IFPC, indirect fire protection capability. And they kind of jumped the gun on naming battalions that. Because really what that is a battalion that is CRAM / Avenger, now M-SHORAD. And actually, if you go up a few slides, you'll see, keep going. So this is, this one. So this is a current IFPC kind of deal, M-SHORAD. And you'll see it's got some radars. They've got the M-SHORAD system and some Stinger man pads, all the more man-portable air defense system. Now we're trying to get to where we have some radars, we have kinetic and directed energy, and then in the far future, They want to have this now if pick capability, right? Which is what Iron Dome was supposed to fill. That's the role it was supposed to fill. If we end up going through with that purchase agreement.
So this is an example of what DoD calls force management. You have current capabilities, you have what you want to get to in the future. So these are long-term programs that are developed, researched, and built with industry, and then over time they're fielded. So between what you have and what you want, there may be an interim solution. That's what you see in the middle. M-SHORAD is medium short-range air defense with the capability we identified the need for. It's actually like 15 years ago, and it's taken a while to fill the gap between man-portable, man-pad stuff like the Stinger, like Sergeant Smith was just talking about, and then the big stuff that they're going to tell you about in a little bit. So it's a Stryker platform that has some pretty unique capabilities, and that it has the laser, if you recall, the phrase from the branch. So that's that, and it's working, and we just test fired it, and it's actually really cool.
Well, yeah, and then so this is, especially for the boards, we've talked about multi-domain operations a little bit, and how it's, we have to make progress to be able to operate under that concept. This is how air defense is getting after that. And we're not going to go deep into MDO because it's a very in-depth subject, but let's go back to one up. We'll go with this one. So the reason we did this, right? I kind of put 88 mission sets here. Is this to help you understand within air defense, we kind of have these 4 defined areas, both internally and externally. So we have SHORAD. People like to scream that. Short range air defense. High, medium altitude air defense. Got space, which, so this USA SMDC is United States Army Space and Missile Defense Command, and that's what Sergeant Courtney said he had a lot of experience in.
And this is where, when I was talking about when you're administratively attached, right? Because that's where you're gonna see a lot of this, in this area here in the SNDCR strap, because again, all of our batteries and our commanders and first arms are all always forward deployed, because that's where our radar sets are at. Okay, so whichever unit is there, or whatever elements there, they are always going to be passed on to us, because that we need to be able to get that support from them, so that like Sergeant Smith was saying, we have 2 dads and 2 moms, and it'll always be that way.
And then we have, I kind of threw this AMD operational support over there. So the top 3, so this is at the brigade level, and this is in like brigade combat teams. They have this air defense, airspace management, brigade aviation element. Yes, it's a long, it's a mouthful. We just call it atom cell generally. This is at the brigade level, at the division level, also the division level. So these 3 here are kind of the 3 main elements of air defense, or assignments of air defense, that are specifically designed to support brigades and divisions and the ground fight. And if going back to kind of some of the fires one, where they talk about clearance of fires and things like that. So you think about artillery, right? We think it shoots from the ground to the ground. Artillery is probably the Army's largest airspace user. And all of that has to be coordinated somewhere and planned somewhere, so that we're not shooting things out of the sky just to try to shoot something on the ground, right? So the big thing here, that is where the atom cell comes in. And that's actually where fire missions receive their clearance to fire. That's where they get that airspace clearance, is there. And then at the division level, it's more of advising, and then DeVarty does some other different things. And we can, if you want specific information, we'll open it up for questions. But the reason I really put this up here is to show you how much we cover, and if you do decide or end up in air defense as a 14 Alpha, an air defense officer, you have to know all of this. So for us, there's 5 enlisted MOSs. There's 3 warrant officer MOSs, and there is 1 officer MOS. So there's enough stuff going on here that we need 8 other defined specialties to manage all of this, but they expect you as an officer to know all of it. So my biggest thing behind this slide is if you do become an air defense officer, the only way to be successful is to be hungry for knowledge, seek knowledge, and understand your craft. You may end up first assignment in SHORAD, go do some space stuff, and then come back to HIMAT. And it's going to be like an entire new job every time you do that, completely unrelated almost. It's like learning an entire MOS all over again, an entire branch all over again.
Because if you end up in space as your first, what I've seen here, at least at this level here, is you're going to be a first lieutenant, right? And so in that position there, depending on which one you go to, especially at the T2 side of the house, you're going to end up being a battle captain. And so you're going to be working with that 2-star, that 3-star, or that 4-star colonel every day. You embrace them. How you're going to meet that individual's mission or missions, because depending on which COCOM you're in, you're going to have multiple missions that you have to meet and be able to provide that protection or that information with your systems. Okay, so that's a big responsibility at that level, right? And so not only that you have to learn here, but like Sergeant Smith was saying, if you end up here, you have to understand how HIMAT, the Patriot, the THAAD, all these other radar systems that come into play, not only Army, but you also have to know how the Navy and how the Air Force all integrate, because you have to be able to brief that information to that 2-star, 3-star. And the reason why I say that, because that's what I did in Germany before I got here. I was briefing that 3-star on how we are protecting his mission sets there within the COCOM there. Okay.
Now, if you're in another branch, you're like, none of this affects me, you're wrong, because it does affect you. Not only are these units protecting your ability to do your job, you may be integrating them with them at certain points. So, like as a specific example off of this slide, Adam BAE works for the Brigade 3 in a BCT. The Adam or the AMD cell and section is part of the protection cell of the division in the Corps, and they work with both the lethal fires, non-lethal fires, and operations. They're supported by Intel. They're Intel officers that are supporting them directly in DeVarden, because the division artillery, which is a brigade headquarters that you put units under, has to understand these capabilities. Now, they may not be the expert. They probably aren't the expert. They have to be able to tap into the experts to be able to deliver good analysis and recommendations to commanders. Joint Integration Cell. You heard from Lieutenant Krusiak last week talking about how a JAGIC works in 10th Mountain Division. Battlefield Coordination Detachment. My good friend Jesse Cadle, who was my FSO when I was a platoon leader, went to a BCD as a senior captain and was part of coordinating Air Force and joint fires into ground maneuver and translating whatever the ATO says in and looking at the ground force commander's plans, I mean, like, this is where we're value added. So this affects you no matter what branch you are, especially like I said before, sustainers sustain everybody. Doesn't matter what kind of formation it is. They don't have organic sustainers, that's you.
That was a good, real quick. That was a good lead into that, sir. Because you know, when he talked about the joining of the JIC, right, the JICO, these 2 levels, a little bit of SHORAD, but mainly these here and all the other air defense assets, right? They really rely on this. Why do you think they rely on the JICO so much? Anybody want to give it a shot? So, yep.
Makes them all work together.
But right, but how do they make it all work together?
I would say communication, but.
Okay, so right, so it's called links, right? So the JICO, what you'll see in here is usually you're gonna see a warrant officer, right? They're in charge of these links. All these links have to be up or down, or they have to build these things out, because I don't want to go too far in depth, but this is where your network, your what's called link 16. Eventually, you may end up learning about it. Okay, but at this point, this is where this is very important, because they need this up and operational. Because remember, all of this stuff right here is tied into a network. It's sending information, receiving information to be able to do something with it. If this goes down here, some of these are organic and they can fight by themselves, but some of them are not. They have to have those links, because it depends on, for example, like with TP2, there's another one, it's called THAAD, which uses the same radar system, but it has a couple different configurations, but it relies on here to receive information to help make some of these determinations when they want to take that shot. Now, it still can be, it'll still be, organic, but it still depends on some information coming through that link, okay? That's the reason why this is very important.
When we talk about information and things like that, it's data, it's digital data, ones and zeros. That is what's being transferred all across DoD on these networks. Is we're trying to share as much information with us and with others about what's going on in the air. That is what it all comes down to. And it's basically, it comes out, that information comes out in an order that is nothing but data links. Sometimes like 25 pages long of formatted, it looks like a code, it looks like it's some secret code of every single thing, every unit, what they're gonna receive, who they're gonna get it from, who they're gonna send it to. It is all laid out, and if you get it wrong, you run into a lot of big issues, because if there's information coming to or from a source that's not identified, and maybe they're supposed to get it from a different source, you end up getting duplicate information, and it gives you bad data, and it essentially makes it to where you potentially would not be able to engage an air threat. And there's also, you'll run some simulation stuff on this as well. Then if sim gets mixed with real world, you can see how that presents issues. Basically initiating air battles for things that aren't real. That would be bad. But yeah. So I think now we've given you very top level. What questions do you have? We have some other slides in here to kind of thought you might want to talk about.
Sorry, going back a little bit, the BCD, is that like the brigade division level thing? Is that like baked into the S3?
The battlefield coordination attachment?
Yeah.
So what that is a joint element. It is the Army's way of integrating all Army airspace users with the Air Operations Center. So the Air Operations Center, it's usually run by the Air Force, but it is a joint organization, so it has all the branches in it. And they essentially manage everything that happens in the air. So we provide our input, and what they also do beyond just managing that airspace is they also do target development and essentially targeting. So they'll determine, okay, they have what's called an air tasking cycle. The execution part of that is 24 hours. So they have a new order every 24 hours for what air assets are going to do and what their purpose is. And so at that AOC, they are determining, they need to know what is available to then determine the best course of action to eliminate a threat that's either in the air or something we can eliminate from the air. And that's what the AOC does. And it comes out in a bunch of two main orders, the air tasking order and the airspace control order. The tasking order is, here's what the airspace users are doing. And the control order is how we kind of manage all that. Think about it almost like we're putting road signs in the sky. If you were driving on a road, it might say one way. You know you're not supposed to drive down that. Well, those things exist in the air too, but they are all really just a concept. There's nothing to physically stop you, nothing to tell you other than that airspace control order. And you have to understand it. You have to know where you are, know what you're doing. Otherwise, you enter airspace or use airspace that you're either not supposed to be in or something else is trying to use at that point in time.
Think back to joint fires. We talked about pizza and giving people pieces of pizza, different kinds of pizza. That's the ATO. Aiden Gerber doesn't like sausage pizza. He doesn't need anti-tank fires, right? He doesn't need that effect from the joint fires. But Katie Honan does. She's got lots of enemy tanks in her AO. So we do this planning 96 hours out to apportion it so that the sausage pizza gets baked and is available for Katie to eat. But Hayden needs something else. So the BCD helps with that planning process and then the alignment of assets to requirements. It takes a long time for reasons. Just accept that and move on. You'll understand this later. There's a cell that comes down to the Army from the Air Force. You get ALOs, Air Liaison Officers, and TACPs JTACs, stuff like that, they go down to the brigade and battalion level. We talked about that a little bit last week. So it's logical then that the Army has cells that go to the Air Force. So we put liaisons on both sides from both forces to make sure we're talking in the same language and get the right output.
Hey guys, this is Colonel Cogbill. Can you hear me?
Gotcha, sir.
So, over the past 30 years or so, our military has pretty much had airspace superiority, largely due to our Air Force and that sort of thing. But so what do you think the type of threats are that we have faced from an air defense perspective over the past 30 years?
Yes, sir. So from my side of the house, working at the strategic side, we all know in regards to what type or what we deal with a little bit with North Korea. We also have a few things that come out of China that we do keep an eye on. Not to necessarily get into some of the type of threats, but there's a few that kind of really test our radar capabilities just based off of how they maneuver and how they the speeds and those type of things as they go through their phase of flight.
And I would say
So what I was thinking about, and I don't know, maybe the cadets, I was just going to see if the cadets just could think about what kind of threats, like, in Iraq or Afghanistan that we may have had and that air defense supported us with.
Go, speak.
Oh, rocket attacks there.
Absolutely. What
Yeah,
else?
very, very, very good. And so that CRAM, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with that, but that stands for Counter Rocket Artillery and Mortar. So the CRAM, it's like a machine gun that shoots rockets down out of the sky, and so that's been a huge help on bases. And I think we've even supplied some to the Ukrainians, and for their use in the war right now. So that's a big thing. So what else? There's another big one, typically in the Middle East, that a threat that we've had that we've needed air defense for.
Scud missiles, sir?
Well, Scuds definitely during the Desert Storm and that sort of thing. That was a huge threat, and the Patriots were a huge help against those. But I guess I was thinking of like UAVs. So the Iranians have these, kamikaze UAVs that they had launched at some of our bases in Iraq and in Syria and that sort of thing. And we've had to use air defense to take those down as well. But coming into this era of potentially facing peer competitors, air defense is going to become a huge asset again. I think to a certain extent over the last 30 years, it's maybe hasn't had the attention that it used to have due to the fact that we've had air superiority. But if we get into a conflict with like even North Korea, Russia or China, all these air defense assets at all the echelons are going to be extremely important. All right, that's all I just wanted to mention.
Thanks, sir. That's actually a perfect segue for Sergeant Courtney. It's worth noting. We have not had to worry about enemy air power like the Army for about 20 years. After the destruction of the Iraqi Air Force, the US Army has not cared very much about enemy air power, but you don't want Sukhoi and Xi'an fighter bombers coming at your formation and destroying you as you're trying to maneuver. And that's why this is so important.
Yeah, I was gonna touch on UAVs, as that's pretty much the most dangerous emerging threat to your everyday ground pounder, because we don't have a lot of answers for it. Larger format ones, we kind of have that. We have that covered, but it's the small stuff that we don't necessarily have an answer for. Namely, if they're implemented with swarm tactics. So if they're sitting 50 of them at once, right? Yeah, we could probably get a couple of them, but there's absolutely no way, there's no asset we have right now that can deal with that. And luckily we haven't had to, even up to 2019, 2020 was when we first started kind of testing CRAM to shoot down smaller drones, like stuff your commercial stuff. And then Late 2020 was the first instance of an attack where they tried to use those against coalition forces with ordnance strapped to them. Luckily, we're able to eliminate them. And luckily, the enemy didn't know that CRAM specifically, so it shoots 75 rounds a second. It holds 1,500 rounds. So if you do some quick math, it runs out of ammo very, very, very quickly. By the book, it takes like 30 to 45 minutes to reload if you do everything exactly right. We did some hot reload drills. We got it down to like 8 minutes, including people coming over from other places to help. But that was taking some prudent risk in not necessarily loading the gun down all the way, skipping some safeties that you can mitigate as long as you're being aware and you're being kind of diligent about safety. But yeah, still 8 minutes to reload one of those guns. That's then going to empty its drum in less than that amount of time.
But it's so cool.
It's
See, I'm jealous because he's gotten to work on that side of the house with that type of weapon system. And I say jealous, I mean, I've enjoyed my career so far, but just seeing that gun operate and the way it sounds, I mean, it's just, man, it's amazing.
Yeah, the rest of air defense is jealous because we actually do our job. We actually shoot things. But anyway,
All right, so when we talk about you know, the future threats that are coming, or as we switch postures and we start looking at our
adversaries?
Yeah, a little bit more, for example, like China or Russia, and again, continue to look at Korea. We got to look at phases. What I mean by phases is, okay, you have what's called like the first phase. First phase is you want to try to destroy as much as possible using your biggest weapon system, which would be like a missile, right? And then the next phase and so on. So each kind of operation is all designed on different type of phases in our operations. So how do we defend against stuff like that? How are we going to go about protecting our assets, particularly like airfields, population centers, for example, you all as the ground troops, if that's what you're going to be in. We utilize what's called the cal and dow, okay? So we got to look at asset protection first. How much do we need, and how much is going to be protected, and do we have what we need to be able to protect it? So some of the things that you want to look at is what we said here is credibility, vulnerability, which is susceptibility, and recoverability, and the type of threat. Type of threat is going to be big, okay? So when we talk about the critical asset list, basically just right there, it's a prioritized list of assets or areas normally identified by phases of the operation, okay? Does anybody know what JP stands for? Joint publication, right? As you can see here, Joint Forces Commander, right? Okay. That person and his team are going to sit down with all the different elements, whether it be the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, okay? And they're going to come up with these phases of operation. They're also going to come up with these critical asset lists. A lot of them has already been done, okay? We use what's called a planner. A planner, there's different types. The one that I've used most is what is called a C2BMC planner, which is another system that I'll talk about later on. Okay, so they go in and then they look at these areas and then they start prioritizing them and actually give them a number. Okay, from there, then you have the defended asset list. Defended asset list is the same thing. It'll get its own number based off of how many assets are within that area. So let me ask you this: what do you think the United States or the continental United States? What number do you think that has on a strategic level? One. Why do you think it's one? The most important asset. So at the air defense side of the house, there's a few mission sets. Okay, and the very first one is the defense of the homeland. That's the reason why you're always going to see the continental United States is always number one. What I mean by that is because when you start dealing with these radar systems and then like the JIT, okay, as that starts going down and all these systems start talking with each other, and all this information starts feeding in, that information actually gets looked at or cross-referenced with the CAL and DAO automatically through a system side of the house, okay? So if it is coming, say if you have a threat that's coming into the continental United States, that is gonna throw a red flag, and that's gonna say, hey, this is the highest priority. Okay, so that's gonna give that joint forces commander, right, or that person that is covering that that area of concern, all right, they say, okay, we need to take action on this one first. And then they're gonna take and send that information out to the lowest echelon, and then those war fighters are actually gonna take action and try to take care of that threat.
So to give you an analog, the CAL at the 3 or 4 star level is generated, right? They say, these are all the things that are important. So it's a menu of options.
It's your wish list to Santa.
Nice. Yeah. And the DAO then is what you put in Santa's bag. It's the resourcing based on the priorities of what needs protection and how those things are aligned. So at the brigade level and below, you probably don't make the cut, to be perfectly honest. Maybe a brigade headquarters, maybe. It's significant assets that are required to accomplish the mission. So it's things like a core support area or the level 4 medical treatment for a theater, because there's always finite assets.
Yeah, I kind of joked around about the other side, the other aspects of air defense not doing their job. Ultimately, they do their job. They are in places to protect these critical assets that are on the defended asset list. And luckily, for the most part, they've been a deterrent up to this point. But just because they were there, sitting there deterring, doesn't mean they're not doing their job. Just an easy way to poke fun at people.
Any questions on the CAL and DAO? If you're at that level of, if you get the opportunity to be at that level, definitely learn and understand how this is developed, right? And then if you have the opportunity to be in that planning section at that level, you'll really see how these two things here come into play, and then how you are going to use your weapon system or radar system to be able to protect or provide information so that other sensors or shooters can be able to protect these CAL and DAO lists. All right.
And like I said, this is your wish list to Santa, and then mom and dad get your wish list. They look at how much money they have. They know they can't buy the whole wish list, right? So now they're like, okay, what's gonna make my kid the happiest? I have this much money to buy whatever. How do I make them the happiest? And this is what ends up under the tree on Christmas morning.
Any questions on that?
They're not in any particular order. A lot of them are up there just to kind of, hey, let's go over it. Any questions about anything else so far?
Sorry, Courtney. Given the recent amount of balloons veering over the continental United States, I recently watched a video on NORAD, and I think it was the Canadian commander was talking about how they had Army personnel embedded within NORAD.
Yeah.
How much communication is there between ADA and NORAD, especially given the continental United States is like primary asset number one? Like,
So
if there's like planes or there's missiles or something like that, does NORAD say, hey, ADA, this is primary asset?
Okay, so one thing you gotta understand about how, okay, without getting too far, because we could be here all day. Especially on man, that one, I want to get up to me start bars. If you ever get an opportunity to take radar theory, if you're in air defense, please take it, because man, we have there's a gentleman that his name is Dr. Stahl, and he has developed quite a few items, especially some of the Patriot systems, the missiles itself, but his class on radar theory is amazing. So with that being said, some of these threats, like, like the balloons and those things, that we in place, they're not designed to see those type of things, okay? Radar systems are looking at your cross section, okay? They're looking at heat temperature. They are looking at objects that are much larger, that are moving at a much faster pace. Okay, so some of those things we're not necessarily going to be able to use what we have in our systems to be able to see that, unless you're seeing how like, oh, there's a balloon there. There are some things that can detect those type of objects, but what we use, or at least what I've used, it would act like there was nothing there. So,
But yeah, you asked about what air defense assets does NORAD have, right? So GMD, right? What does that look like it's in? It's in a silo. They're only located on the continental U.S. Well, not necessarily CONUS, they're also right in Alaska. But anyway, so we have these missile silos, and those are there to defend specifically the United States, our land. Also, we talked about like the AAMDCs and the one that is specifically designed, their whole job is to worry about the defense of the US homeland, right? It's that National Guard, AAMDC, all they care about is the United States. So that is also what's aligned potentially under NORAD in those situations to handle those threats. And like the National Guard, AAMDC, they have an enduring mission. It's the NCR mission, the National Capital Region. We have air defense assets all around DC, protecting specific things within DC. And it is a 24/7, 365 job that National Guard units rotate into. There's a bunch of different assets, and actually the National Guard has some cooler equipment than the active duty when it comes to short range air defense because of their mission set.
So to a specific question, do either of you have, I have no awareness of the level of communication between NORAD and then those units.
right, so NORAD is operated by the Air Force, and then you have they're in lines with SNDCR strat, and so for example, the National Guard Air Defense element that obviously protects the White House, you're going to see that there's some of the short rat stuff there, so they do have direct line communication, especially at that level, the WNCs, and if you're in the KOC or if you're in the AOC, a lot of times where you're going to see that is you're going to see that on the Air Force base, and that's where I spend most of my time in the 24-hour operations center, because not only that you have to work with the GOs there that are defending their assets, but you're also in direct line with the SecDef, you're in direct line with DESMAC, a lot of these personnel, these higher elements, right? And there's one picture that I didn't put on here, but there's a system that I've used and that they're still currently fielding, what's called C2MC, and it's Command Battle Management Communication System. And it's a system of systems to integrate all air and missile defense assets into one common picture. And that system is actually at the White House. They have there's a person there that actually operates it, and that's what I've used. Okay, that's how I get my communications through our systems, and then we pass the information on. You have that at actual NORAD. You have it at a couple different locations, but those commanders utilize that system to see the bigger picture based on the air defense side of the house to make their decisions, whether it be at their the organic element, or if you're depending on another system to make your fire support system to be able to go take that threat out.
So something you will realize once you get out into the Army, there are a lot of things we can't talk about publicly, because as soon as you start talking about what these processes and systems are in a free and open society, who's listening? Exactly. Okay, so there are lots of things they can't say because they're classified. There's also things we don't talk about because it's just unwise to do so. And what you will often hear back from in the media is incomplete at best, and sometimes skewed. So just take grains of salt with what you read about or hear, specifically like the balloon stuff in particular. I've heard very little that I would say crosses the threshold of reasonable, because it's very politically charged. And it's good that people are passionate about the defense of the United States. We should rigorously debate and as a general public want to make sure that we are safe. What you will find is, when you become part of the organization that does that, imperfect understanding both by members of Congress who have oversight and the ability to give or take away money, as well as the general public, can lead to unnecessary frustration. So what I would tell you as a general message is be reassured, there are good systems and processes in place, and the right people generally have the right information at the right time to make wise decisions.
Can we go to the last slide, sir? I want to, because that's actually goes into, I'm sure a lot of you are actually wondering about those type of things, the threats, especially the defense of the homeland.
What's
okay?
the last slide?
This one, sir.
Okay, great.
Just to give you a general idea on how I've operated through my military career, and then to give you perspective of how the continental United States is protected. Obviously, this picture right here is open source, all right, everybody knows about it, but this is a good picture to use. As you can see down here, you have these radar systems. Okay, that's me. All right, so this is your first line of defense or detection and this type of threat.
Those radars see a very long way.
That's us. So when you get that up, as you can start seeing as through the phases of flight, that's what we call it, phases of flight. Okay, and through its phases of flight, there are different type of radar systems or radar sets that's going to be starting to detect that. Now, as you can see, you have multiple on here. When we talk about multi-domain or joint operations, okay, you can see that we have these different elements. You have the Navy, you have the Air Force, you have the Navy / Air Force. Okay, this thing is actually really cool. Been on there, it's awesome. But again, as you can see through the phase of the flight, we know that Earth's pretty big. Okay, this system right here is only looking in one directional way. All right, so how do you think that information is being passed along? How do you think once something actually acquires it or picks it up, how do you think that information is being passed along? Huh? No. The jig, right? That's so going back to that thing, that is the reason why that is so important, because those links are what matter. If those links are not operational or configured correctly, it doesn't matter if this person sees it, okay? Because that information will never get passed along. All right, that's what needs to be. So again, as it goes through the phases of flight, okay, now you're starting to see these detection patterns, right? Okay, and then the good thing about this is because at NORAD or SBC RSTRAT, that is the defense of the homeland, they're seeing this, right? And as these systems start to acquire these type of threats, it gives them the ability to make these decisions, right? It's all about time. Time is not our friend. Okay, so how do we buy back time? How do we get some of that back? Well, it's integrating with our brothers and sisters of the different militaries, right, or different branches. Okay, we utilize their air defense assets. Because remember, these things right here, they're also doing other missions while conducting these missions. Okay. Oh yeah. All right, so as you go through, and then like he was saying earlier, GMD, those missiles, right? As it comes up, then you can see it goes up and it takes out that threat. That is how that works. Yep.
Are there any pockets where we can't see missile, or is it basically 100% covered?
That's classified.
I'm just kidding.
No, there may be some areas where there is a certain radar that doesn't have coverage there, but we pretty much see everything.
And remember, all right, so all of these have, each one of these elements or these sensors issues where they have their own envelope. What I mean by envelope is they have their right and left limits, okay? A lot of that stuff is built into what? We just talked about it earlier. Cow and down, right? And so within the cow and down, the plan, okay, the plan, basically a lot of this stuff over the years have been developed, and it continues to develop over time as the threat evolves, as the threat changes. So what we have to do, for example, like myself or Sergeant Smith or anybody within that planning cell, is always updating this information as operations change. Okay, because when these individuals are operating here, yes, they have the freedom of movability based off of what their other mission sets are at. But if they're having to utilize, if we're having to utilize their asset for a particular mission, well, there's only a certain area of operation that they can move within. Okay, defined based off of the plan and then the down. So it's really important that all of this stuff is designed and updated in a timely manner, so that in the event that a threat does happen, we can take action.
So it's worth noting here, because what you're seeing is the product of decades of thought and capability development and integration and building, right? In war, as timeless as it is, there are always periods of adaptation. So our enemies consider these systems and they look to exploit vulnerabilities. That's why you're seeing things like balloons, low-tech solution to a complicated problem that might have skirted around our high-tech solution. But if you listened to specifically the Northcom, or maybe it was NORAD, whichever, the spokesman, the Air Force One Star, who was on TV and did a pretty good job of fielding a lot of really interesting questions, like 90 minutes after it was announced. Talked about, hey, this is so essentially a blessing in disguise, because we've discovered now a blind spot. And now by seeing 3 objects in 4 days, we now have technical information we probably didn't have before. So we can take that technical information and either adjust the capabilities we have to find those things, or to know that we need to develop new capabilities to do that. Systems of systems are vulnerable to what? Disruption. Okay, so don't make the false assumption that everything's gonna be able to talk to everything else at the same time. That particular problem is why convergence isn't necessarily possible yet in our doctrine. We talked about that a little bit during Army Fires. So there are really smart and intelligent and amazing people that are probably going to figure that problem out. Maybe you're one of them in the future, once you jump into that field. What we have dealt with and what you will find, I'm very confident early in your career, is that you must account for and assume that you're going to have losses of communication. So when you have losses of communication, we fall back on the commander's intent and disciplined initiative. So there are times when you may not be able to talk, but you got to find a way to accomplish the mission. And in this system, it's great to consider. You've got joint capabilities across different components of the armed forces with redundant methods of communication. They're redundant because we know that some of them will get disrupted and or stop working. So having a pace plan matters at the lowest tactical level and at the highest strategic level.
You're always going to have a human in the loop in this. Even when I say how all of these talk with each other, majority of the stuff is still going to be organic. They still have that person in the loop to be able to make that decision. Right? I don't see that really ever changing just based off of the complexity here. But again, you have sensors and then you have shooters, and you have also other elements that have a sensor and a shooter at the same time, right? So a Patriot, or then like you have the TP2, but it's called THAAD, just it's a little different. Okay, but you still use the same radar. That type of element is organic, and it makes its own decisions, but it can still rely on information from these different elements, right? So it can help with certain things, okay, but you're still going to have that commander or that fire patrols officer is going to make that decision on taking that shot or whatever the case may be. Yep.
So with these like links and the joint integration cell, is that network its own infrastructure, or is it attached to an existing network?
Yeah, it's a link 16, right? So it is its own network.
So it also goes beyond link 16. There's link 11, saddle, tattle.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of different link formats that we use, and they are standalone networks and then get integrated into each other. And we have systems that can basically translate the different links because they're different message formats. It can translate it, turn into something else, and send it back out to where it needs to go. So it could be radios, it could be IP based. It could be satellite based, so there's a lot of different ways.
So it's kind of like a pace plan within.
Right, yeah, right, because different elements use different types of tattles, like you were saying. So you have tattle J, you have tattle B, you have tattle 11. All right, well, within that jig is what is taking those messages in and converting it into a different type of message, right, and sending that information back out. So the receiver can actually take that information in based off of how it was designed and utilize that information however it needs to be. Very good. Yeah.
I know like Space Force is like doing it. Is there an integration of some sort of defense for the space? Like, is ours.
Right. So.
Is that gonna happen or occur?
Yeah, yes and no. So currently right now, they are taking some army personnel, and particularly there's a, what's called JTAGs. Okay, JTAGs is going to be your IR, okay, overhead IPR. Really, that is your first detection, okay, space element. So that the Space Force is actually in the process of taking that over. Do you remember the Air Force PMS that was just here? So he is actually in charge of doing a lot of that. I spoke with him because I still would like to try to get over to that. But yes, but some of that integration is happening. It is a little slower. The issue is that air defense, ADA does not want to let go of some of us to go over. Unfortunate, but some of that integration is happening. A lot of it is from the Air Force over. So here, as you see, the Space Force cadets, they actually fall in line with the Air Force, and then once they commission, they will go to their.
So that efforts are integrated. Exactly who's going to do what is still kind of being worked out.
Do they have their own asset protection? They have their own system?
Yeah, they're gonna have their own mission sets. They have their own, a lot of those are gonna be all your space-based, your satellite systems, but all your ground elements that we just showed you here, that will still remain the Army and the air defense side of the house, and then like the Navy's air defense and so on.
Yeah, space is more so the use of space for the ground and air fight versus defending space. It's communications, intelligence, and early warning protection. It's kind of what is in space.
It's worth noting that both Air Force, Space Force, and Army space assets have places where they converge physically and then mentally, right? So because I just came from there, Colorado Springs, Colorado has Peterson Space Force Base. You've got the Cheyenne Mountain location, as well as other stuff where we've had the redundant National Command Authority for the country since a long time ago. And you have the 1st Space Brigade, the Army's, one of the Army space units that's on Fort Carson, specifically so that they can be there and train together and work together and operate together. So it's not, you're gonna find in your career, sometimes you're like, did somebody literally just roll a dice and throw stuff on the map, right? And it seems haphazard. And it may be, but sometimes it's legacy from other things, but sometimes we get it right. In that case, I think DoD's done a great job of trying to get all the stakeholders essentially in the same room so that they can play nice.
Any other, yep.
Have you heard anything about the new global ICBM? How good is that with you?
So not necessarily at that level, because you gotta think, so,
That's intercontinental.
right, now, are there, movable? Sure, there are. But what you're thinking at that, no, not really. I mean, they have, some things have been tested, but nothing to where that I'm tracking, that we need to worry about. Is it possible? Probably, but I don't see it anytime soon. Yep.
Just gonna go off that, how do you detect hypersonic missiles that kind of use the curvature that are at the high from radar? Like,
So that's what.
Down from above.
So that's where we talk about radar theory, right? That's one of the classes that if you ever get the opportunity to do, and then if you ever get an opportunity to take Space Cadre 1 and 2, okay, that's the Army's course, that would be another one. Some of the questions that you all are asking, you gotta ride a fine line on how you say things, because at that level, it's all kind of closed doors, right? But there are protections, okay? There are things that we can do. It's just all on how the system is designed, and those engineers and those personnel like Dr. Stoff that I was talking about earlier, that sit around and they think of these things, and they read those threat characteristics that we receive based on intel or whatever the case may be, and then We use that information to design our systems or make them better. Okay, that's the great thing about ADA. On the TP2 side of the house or CPMC, it is designed in such a way, it's called spiral development. The reason for that is because it allows the ability to be able to design something without having to build a whole new system. We can upgrade it. We can add certain portions to that system simultaneously while we're still operating it, which is very good. Good place.
As far as hypersonic cruise missiles, like you were talking about, Hale, how we were getting at, detecting them isn't the issue, it's intercepting. That's the issue.
Yeah,
That's the biggest issue, intercept.
very good. Any other questions?
We are out of time. Gentlemen, thank you for sharing your expertise on this subject. It affects all of our lives. Great job being here. Have a great day. If you're going to the training meeting, I'll see you there.